Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, thank you for tuning into Healing the Spirit. I have not really been sharing conversations for a while, and I have been reflecting on why that is. This podcast really started out as mostly conversations with people that I find inspiring, practitioners, colleagues, and friends, and then I had to really take a step back, and I'm still trying to figure out why that is. But I feel like I'm coming to a different way of having conversations with people. I've been recording a couple conversations recently, and something's shifting. I'm not really sure what has happened, but I think there's something about having shared a lot of these solo episodes that has changed my approach and what I desire out of conversations. And so I wanted to put a pause on releasing conversations until I have a little bit more clarity around what it is that I want to be sharing in my conversation spaces. And in that process of taking a break, there were some conversations that I recorded way back when that has been so impactful for me. And they've really worked their magic through me on a private level behind closed doors. And this is one of them. So my guest in conversation today is Rachel Blodgett. And Rachel, is a kindred spirit. Rachel is a friend. Rachel is an incredible artist. And I just remember really, really loving this conversation and really, really loving spending time with Rachel so much. And you'll hear a little bit in the conversation about how we met. But this conversation is interesting because there's something that felt really private and introspective to me about this conversation. And I think for a while there's a part of me that wonders if this is just a conversation that Rachel and I were meant to have. You know, it felt very internal. But I've been listening back to it a couple times, and I'm really convinced that this is a conversation that I'm meant to share with all of you. And so, yeah, we talk a lot about creativity in this conversation. We talk a lot about what it means to be a person aware of their spiritual dimension and also being aware of their creative potential, and also aware of the fact that both those terms don't exactly, they're symbols. You know, that they don't necessarily reflect what it is that we are trying to express when we say those words, right? And so it's a profound conversation. Rachel is someone I know as a walker of liminal spaces. And so this conversation feels like it, you know, and both of us were kind of swimming in this estuary of the seen and the unseen, the hidden and the visible, the physical and the non-physical. And so maybe a good way to introduce Rachel is just to share what she wrote in her short and sweet and perfectly crafted bio, in my opinion. Rachel Blodgett, she, her, is an artist and a poetic spell crafter from Santa Rosa, California. She's devoted to the mystery of being human and to courtship with artistic expression as a method of communicating with the universe. Always in flux. I love that so much. So our conversation really took place around November, I believe, 2022. November 16, 2022 was when we recorded this conversation. So it's an oldie, you know, it's been a while. It's a time capsule for sure. But I think especially during this Venus retrograde, so many of these themes are so present. And so I'm excited for you to listen to it and see what is speaking to you about this conversation and about this thread that Rachel and I are weaving together. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Rachel Blodgett. Thank you for being here with me on the podcast, Rachel. It's so lovely to see you, and I can't wait to talk to you. I feel like there are just so many juicy things that I've just been digesting, metabolizing, and I'm just in awe of who you are as a person. So thank you for being you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan. I've been looking forward to this, and I just always appreciate connecting with you so much. So it's just a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited. I feel like I wish there's a visual version of my podcast because, you know, you right now and your studio is just such a treat to see the glory of all of it. I was reminiscing about like when we first met, and I think we met through charting your course, right? Or did we meet before that?
Yeah, I think it was through charting your course.
Yeah, because I think you had connected with Britain, and then I was co-teaching charting your course, and then I was like, who is this being? And I think it's been interesting that our circles have overlapped as well. I know that Nicole Franco is also, you know, connected to you. Yeah, I feel like we're kind of interconnected in this magical web, and I can't wait to see what comes up in this conversation. I always like to begin my conversation with asking my guest the same question, which is, who do you know, sense, or feel yourself to be in this present moment?
Well, lately I feel really connected to being like a nurturer. I feel like in the last couple of years, I've just been like orienting more toward my family, and my partner and I have 2 little dogs now. They're like our children. And I have 5 younger siblings that I'm super connected to. And so I just been thinking a lot about like lineages of family and ways of like, I think there are like people in every family that take on the role of being like an archivist almost.
Yeah.
And I've always been really interested in my family history and just like, you know, paying attention to everyone and like the ways that we connect. So I think that's kind of like part of who I am lately. And I'm an artist. I'm always an artist. And I relate to being like very fluid in a lot of ways, even though the way I actually live my life is usually involves like a lot of routine. I'm interested in like pushing the edges of routines and like um yeah, just like expanding definitions and creating spaciousness around anything that like feels super solid.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It reminds me of something you wrote, which really spoke to me on such a deep level. You wrote, "So many things I have failed at over the years. You learn to embrace and integrate failure as a signal showing you a self that blossoms differently. Is anyone living life the way they thought they would? For me, getting older has been a continual surrendering process, allowing myself to be constantly softer and harder, perpetually embodying new shapes. The part of my life that I most liken to an awakening, because also awakening is constant and every moment, was a moment when I thought I would have to let go of everything. Not an artist, not much of a friend or partner, not healthy, not able, not employable, not anything I thought I could be. In many ways, I came back to life slowly from that moment, but I will never take any of myself for granted again. Everything is a privilege, none of it guaranteed. Today, I do my best. Tomorrow, I wake up and see who I am again. Some days moving so slow, almost hibernating, and others full of seeds come to fruition. We're not aiming for conformity. We're not the boss babes. We are sleepy bears, snakes, shedding skins. We are human, dreaming a world where you get to be human too, where we can set down the comparison, the ladders, the self-hatred, and just be human. I just love that so much. And I feel like in hearing you speak about the fluidity that seems so present in your work and in how you give yourself permission to be, that was really coming through. And this idea of like building a new world is fascinating because you wrote dreaming a world where you get to be human, right? And I'm curious if anything in your life in the present moment feel like, yeah, like building that new world, or maybe allowing to disintegrate anything that is not part of that new world for you.
It's a big question.
Also, I'm like, whoa, okay, Scorpio rising is here. We are
Yeah.
jumping into the deep ends. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like my approach is like I just noticed um I'm always interested in like what is the like one thing I could do that would like create the most change in my life.
Mm.
Um and a lot of times it's actually like a really simple thing,
Mm-hmm.
like like changing like my like sleep routine, or like um changing like the first thing I do when I get to the studio and things like that.
Mm.
So I'm really interested in like, rather than like, I think when I was younger, I would make more decisions that were like a big sweeping like chop.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And 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 now it's more like, what tiny tweak can I do to like just adjust my life? Um, because I I love change. Like I love novelty. I love being able to like feel the world being alive, and feel like the power I have to like enliven things.
Mm.
Um, but I feel like the like the part of it that is like the wisdom of practice is like, how can I do that in like a subtle little tweak?
Mm. Mm.
Um, so like, your question of like how like ways of how are you naming that
Yeah,
question?
I was really phrasing that around this idea you brought up around creating a world
Mm-hmm.
where we all get to be humans, right? We
Yes.
don't just get further and further into the embodiment of like what we think a successful persona looks like, and rather
Yeah,
like just really to me, at least the way it's resonating is that there's a way in which we can all start to embody our humanity and not just the part of us that's Instagrammable, the part
totally.
of us that's that we can then broadcast out into the world, which, by the way, as a moon and 10th house person, I really love broadcasting things. It's part of my showing up too. I'm not
Yeah.
bedeviling that, but I think we get into a pickle when we feel like every single second of our lives need to serve the purpose of how we show up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that for me, like, again, like being the oldest in my family, like the oldest grandchild, um, there's been like a big theme of like perfectionism and achievement.
Mm,
And um and so, whereas at some points in my life I thought like I need to like I need to be the best in all these
mhm.
ways, and like I need to like that looks like completing things and like being excellent. And um over time I've come to realize like, oh, actually for me it's actually wonderful to just like accept that I'm going to be late or like
Mm,
I'm I have to say no to things, or I have to like own that yeah, I am going to like fail in some way, um because actually that's like more true, and that's more I don't know. I don't want to frame it like that's more perfect, because I think that you could actually like take this and make it its own form of purity culture. Um,
totally. Hmm.
and that's really not what I want to do. But um, I think that like my the biggest teacher in this like deconditioning method, or whatever you want to call it, has been my body, and like
Mm,
um, finding ways of like allowing my body to be sick or to be imperfect or to be like forgetful, and finding ways of like accepting that like I'm still a valid creature in all of these
wow.
forms,
I
and that
get.
there's really room for like every type of being in this world.
Hmm. Hmm. I get shivers all over my body as you're saying that. Thank you for naming that. That feels like truth to me. And um I'm trying to find, there was something that you wrote as well that really spoke to me about this is what you wrote. I think this was in August last year. Sometimes I crave being witness to my own self. Like I can get lost in other people without long expanses of time in my own private inner sanctum. As a business owner and artist, so many of the choices I have made came down to the simple fact of what is possible with the body I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like um there's been a lot of times when like I'm really seeking an example. Like
Mm.
I just want someone to like show me how to do something. um so I don't have to figure it out.
Hmm.
And for me that's usually getting off track.
Yeah.
Like I think that I actually do have to figure out a lot of things by myself,
Mm.
and that can be like a very slow plodding path.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but I think that's true for a lot of us, that like there's not a clear example of like who we are or what our
Mm-hmm.
job is in the world, and like it takes a lot of like inner listening and gentleness to just like let that show itself over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's such a beautiful segue to my next question, which is I'm curious to hear anything that you feel like sharing that feels alive for you today about how you came to this point in your path at this moment. Yeah, maybe start with your sun moon rising because that's always a nice place to start. But I'm curious to hear about your journey thus far.
Yeah. Well, I have Taurus sun
Mm.
and Sagittarius moon and Scorpio rising. Um, and I mean, it's right now is a really interesting moment on my path because I'm next semester I'm going to be teaching at my the place where I went to art college, California College of the Arts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've had this like thread of teaching kind of my whole life, just like growing up with younger siblings, and then like I used to work as a camp counselor, and I've worked as like a preschool teacher and an art teacher, and um, a few different things over the course of my life. And then once I started doing Serpent and Bow, that kind of like I set that down.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited for that to be coming back, especially because like I feel like the pandemic has had such a, I mean, honestly, it's had a devastating effect on young people, especially. And I just feel like people need like mentorship and support and hope right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like really inspired and um excited being around younger people
Mm-hmm.
and being around other artists.
Mm-hmm.
So I like can't wait to get into this more like community atmosphere, and like the academic atmosphere too can be um like such an incubator. It's such a like protected, intimate growth space.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just really excited to be a part of that again. And also it like kind of came out of nowhere, but I it's funny because on New Year's Eve, or maybe it was New Year's Day of this year, like I woke up and the first thing I did was get out my computer and start applying to the JC, the junior college in
Mm-hmm.
my town. So I was like, I think I need to teach this year. I need to figure out how to do that. Um and then like I just forgot about it.
Wow.
Got back to work and kept doing Serpent and Bow.
Mm-hmm.
But this teaching thing like didn't go away. Um so yeah, but coming back to your question of like what got me here, I feel like I wouldn't have been able to say yes to this big shift if I hadn't been like just really caring for myself and like asking myself these questions of like what's important to me and what am I here to do? Because I feel like the past year I've really been trying to like investigate that with
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you also say that recently Serpent and Bow, was it its 7th anniversary or 7th
Yeah.
birthday? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the 8th year
Okay. So that was in
currently.
2021.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. How did you get started with Serpent and Bow?
I started making underwear for myself. And it was like a personal project that I started as a way of like connecting to my body.
Mm,
And there's always, I mean, talking about like Scorpio layer, there's always this part of me that's like, I'm much more interested in things if there's something about it that's secret.
mm-hmm.
So, um, so like the underwear, everyone's like, make outerwear. I'm like, no, it's not secretive. Because I just love that, like the intimacy of underwear.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I started it as like a personal project with myself, and then um just slowly like people wanted them.
Mm,
And um at the time, like the shape of underwear that I was making was really rare.
mm-hmm.
Like nobody was making something that had like that much coverage. And that was, I just wanted like a big canvas so that I could put
Mm-hmm.
art on it. Um and so yeah, just since then I started ordering like bigger and bigger pieces of fabric over time, and Serpent and Bow just like very slowly evolved into my job.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And before that, as an artist, were you working with specific medium?
I've always I've been pretty like mixed media, tactile with my work. Like I've done pretty much all kinds of art. Um, but I think there's always like a strong writing component,
Mm,
and um, I'm really interested in things that are like can be touched or have some sort of like use value, you know? So
mm-hmm.
like I was doing like bookmaking and you know, different forms of sculpture that had to do with like the home and the body um and things that are kind of just like right in between like an object for use and fine art.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even like performance. I'm interested in like the parts of day. I mean, like I feel like there's ways of talking about art that have a parallel when you're talking about spirituality or magic,
Totally.
right? So like in the art world, it's like performance art, and then in the spirit world, it's like ritual.
Yeah.
um,
Exactly.
so I feel like what I'm in all my work, I've been kind of like weaving those things and like paying attention
Mm,
to just like how we use different words for the same thing a lot of
mm,
times,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
depending on the context.
And intention, maybe too.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's fascinating to think about that connection between creativity and spirituality. Something that you and I had talked about before this conversation was this idea of, um, having a circular path, right? Having a path that's serpentine, that um, how fascinating, especially in light of you coming back to school, not to learn, but to teach, right? That like sometimes life brings us back to where we came from in one
Mhm.
shape or another. And it's interesting because I think, I love the conversation about how creativity and spirituality are both nonlinear, but also when you really think about it, life is nonlinear. It's not just creativity as this rarefied thing, but I think also from our conversation earlier, I've always felt from you this awareness that, your creativity and your spirituality is part of your humanity. Like they're facets of, they kind of play the role of like, you know, they become cloaks, but also they are reflective of what's within, which feels to me also very much, you know, related to creating art out of garment, right? That there is something that's like wearable, but also came from a vision that represents the inner world of the person who makes it, but also reflects the inner world of the person who wears it. You know, because I'm sure you've seen through different collections, different kinds of people are attracted to different things in your work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I'm fascinated. I'm people are really fascinating to me. So, I think the muse or like the person I'm creating for does kind of shift, you know?
Tell me more about that process.
I think I really, well, like when I was a kid, I really loved Harriet the Spy. And I feel like, you know, Harriet the Spy is like an observer, like literally a spy. But there's this part of me that's like an observer, like paying deep attention to people and like also paying deep attention to like the ways that like, you know, different communities and different like groups of people connect. And so there's ways of looking at that as like, you know, in this spiritual world, we can think about like different energies that are like playing through people, or like if you think about astrology, you're like, oh, like that's happening because of like this transit or something. But I think that like that quality of observing tends to like just roll through my work, and I just pay a lot of attention to like symbols. And like a recent one, the one that I just finished is a willow tree. And it was like the first time that I carved a whole tree, because I usually am making like these lovely like you know, sprigs of different plants and herbs that can like lay across the body in different ways. But it felt like I feel like in awe of willow trees, like their presence and the movement, and the way like all the different shapes of the branches fit together. Like I remember just like looking at willow trees when I was a little kid, and like the way that they move and how they're like such a comforting presence. And they also have like pain relieving qualities, and they also like, you can cut willow branches and put them in water, and then that water can be used to root other types of plants.
Wow.
Because willows, they're like, they just grow super prolifically if they're in like a watery area. They'll just like grow endlessly, and they have like really crazy root systems. But I think that like just like the softness of willow and like this presence of like strength and emotion and being connected to fluidity and being connected to the moon, and like, I don't know, it's something that I'm like just being with. So it's so I don't have like a strong reason, but I just noticed that there's like different plants, different symbols that tend to like have a lot of resonance for groups of people at different periods of time. And I do think that that's also like part of the job of the artist is to like notice those symbols and bring them.
Wow.
You know,
It feels like channeling a little bit too. Like you're kind of noticing what's maybe in the collective or what a specific segment of the collective is needing at the moment, and like kind of bringing that forward. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that like different people do that in different ways. Like I think about like your music, you know, and the ways that you can I mean, music is incredibly powerful, what you can do with sound to like move emotion. So yeah, I think there's like many ways to move culture.
Totally.
Right. And I think that like providing symbols is like one of the ways that I'm playing with.
Wow. I love that. I love that. And it also, I think as you were speaking, I started thinking about how sometimes symbols have this way of moving through us that maybe we're not super aware of in that moment, you know, or we don't really know what it means or how to contextualize it. But as time goes by, we get to a point where like it only becomes apparent to us or clear to us after the fact, right? After we move through whatever it was we were supposed to. Yeah.
Totally.
How do you see your wearable art kind of working in people's lives? I mean, it's interesting because when I thought about it, I was like, maybe this question doesn't really make sense because, you know, you're creating such intimate pieces of garment and then it's sent to people. And then, you know, intimate pieces of garments don't always get as much like airtime, maybe publicly, as visible pieces of garment. But I'm wondering if you had a sense or if you've maybe even received feedback in the many years that you've been doing this with regards to how your work moved people.
Well, I mean, one of the first things that comes to mind is like, often people want the garments when they're in a time of like change or transition or transformation, which is like what the initial purpose was for me to, you know, a way of like reflecting an inner change that's taking place and a way of like just creating a moment to acknowledge yourself and acknowledge like how actually sacred and wild it is to be a human, and have a body and you know, like meet yourself every day.
Yeah.
So for some people it's like there's been a lot of people who go through like a hysterectomy or like cervical cancer or breast cancer or mastectomy or like a lot of things that have to do with like your body, your internal body, like your secret body. That I think there's like moments that require a type of holding that I think that the anonymity, like I think there's an anonymity to my job that's like, I don't know these people, but I know how to create for them in a way to like honor what they're going through. You know, because I think it's like a rare thing now that someone would be creating something specifically for you. And like everything I make, I'm like handling it with the person's name next to it from start to finish. And a lot of my garments are like dyed with plants, and I'm like paying attention to like the qualities of those plants when I'm choosing like, you know, or even just the color, because I think color in itself can be really powerful. And yeah, like carving specific images for people. And I'm just like offering this combination of like respect for what people want and what they're calling in, and then also like acknowledging my own gift, my own ability to like channel or like decipher the energy beneath what they're saying, and let my own like artistic energy flow through.
Wow.
So like when I'm making custom things for people, a lot of times like over time I've gotten to this place where like I'm like, send me a poem or like a list of things that are meaningful to you, or like a few sentences about what you're going through, but don't send me like directions of exactly how to make your thing, because I just don't, it's like the magic doesn't work when it's too controlled.
Yeah. There needs to be a translation happening, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's something about like just the asking, like a person getting to the point where they're like, oh, I'm really going through something, I'm going to ask for like this ritual garment. I think that in itself is like a powerful part of the process.
Yeah.
And then there's like receiving the garment, and then there's the way the garment exists in your life, and like even the point of like retiring it, you know, of like, oh, I don't really connect with this anymore. Like I'm not really wearing this anymore. And then where does it live after that? And I think sometimes like things pass through a few different people, which I love. Or sometimes they're like buried, or sometimes they're like wrapped in a scarf and put into like a memory box or something. So yeah, they exist in a lot of different ways in people's lives.
Yeah. Wow. I really felt like this instinct to talk about your chart a little bit, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Because I could really feel your chart talking when you were saying it. And I wasn't even aware of like your placements, but looking at it now, it's so like, wow. I mean, there are a couple places here that I was looking at. One is that your ascendant, you know, Scorpio, is ruled by Mars in your fourth house in Aquarius. So there is that, I think, air of privacy. You know, the fourth house is often called the subterranean in the Greek, like the ancient Greek. They call the fourth house literally the subterranean, and I think I was really hearing that from what you were saying. And also, I'm looking at your sun in the seventh house, right? Which we both share, by the way. We both have suns in seventh house.
I was really hoping you could talk about that today.
Yeah. I feel like we can really go deep there. There's a lot. And I'm also wanting to come back to that, because this piece about you coming back to teach feels very much like your Sun and Jupiter conjunction, really getting activated by that node. Because currently, as we're speaking, when we're recording this conversation, the North Node is in Taurus, right? And we were just moving out of an eclipse. And that eclipse was kind of really happening right on top of your Sun and Jupiter. So how cool is that?
Wow.
You know, that feels pretty massive to me. But what I wanted to get to with regards to what you were sharing about anonymity, about the secret body, which is, I mean, that's such a juicy word. I'm like, can we talk about that too? Is I'm looking at how your sun is ruled by Venus and Chiron in the 8th house. And Venus and Chiron are together, right? And we know that Chiron is the wounded healer, and the 8th house has to do with the places where we don't maybe have a lot of control, where we're asked to go into the underworld. Yeah.
Mm.
And they're ruled by Mercury, that is also in your 8th house. And we were kind of talking about, people sharing what was going on with them or any poem, and then you translating it kind of as a way to honor the passage that they're moving through, which is very mercurial. Mm.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's cool. I mean, I love that. Like, I feel like your approach to astrology is very much like poetic translation too.
Mm.
Like, I just love your ability to like see these movements and like overlay them.
Yeah, thank you. I feel inspired. Like, there are moments when, especially if I have a relationship with the person and I know they're open to hearing insights from their chart, it's just like, as you're speaking, I just hear it, and I'm like, there must be something in Rachel's 8th house. And when I pull it up, it's like, okay, lo and behold. But yeah, I really feel, this idea, to go back to what you were saying earlier about the secret body, I'd love to hear you explore more around what's coming up for you at this moment with that idea of the secret body, and maybe even your relationship with the archetype of the secret body, or also your own secret body.
Yeah, I've like never said that phrase before in my life.
It's profound. I love it.
I don't know why that came out just then, but it just felt like the right description of what I was talking about. And now that we're talking about it, I'm like, I know exactly what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like it's almost like your like psychic body or something, like the way your like inner perception of your body. And I think also, like, for a lot of us that have like expansive gender, there's complexity there. Or like the way that we name our bodies and the way that we perceive our bodies might be different from the way we feel ourselves being perceived as we like walk through the world. Like for me, like I love like playing with femininity, even to like an extreme degree. Like I feel like the way that I relate to clothing and like dressing feels like drag to me. And I like when I was younger, I felt like, oh, like, and like people would always say to me, like, your clothes feel like costumes. Like the way you dress seems like you're wearing a costume. And it kind of is, because underneath the surface, I feel pretty like genderless, or I feel like my gender is very like amorphous and fluid.
Yeah.
But like my outward, I love to like present as like hyper feminine, but then actually I feel pretty uncomfortable when people comment on it in any way. So like coming back to the spy thing, I feel like the way that a lot of times I feel like a spy because I'm like showing up as this like very feminine, very like cute looking being, but under the surface I'm like a lot just different than that.
Yeah. I really resonate with that, and I'm wondering now if some of that has to do with being a sun in 7th house person for both of us. I do feel like the way I show up in terms of how I dress is very much, it's almost like I'm on a mission and I'm just trying to find the quickest way to get to the heart of what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, you know? And so the self kind of becomes a blank canvas a little bit, you know? It's like,
Yes.
because I'm trying to get to know the essence of the person, or trying to get to know the essence of the thing, right? Or the place or the situation. And I'm not so interested about bringing myself and shining necessarily in that situation, but I want to shine a light on the other thing, right? Which the
Yes.
seventh house poetically we can think of as the other. And so, yeah, often it's like, and it's interesting too, Rachel, because for example, right now as we're sitting, I don't know, maybe I'll edit this part out, but I find it hilarious because this is maybe like the most casual and like cozy thing I could be wearing today. And I felt really, I was like thinking about it right before we recorded. I was like, like a part of my mental process is like, maybe I need to dress up more for Rachel. But then I'm like, no, actually, no, like just stay hobo, you know? And I was like, okay, whatever. And then you show up and you're like dressed up and there's just such a like presence to you at this moment. And I feel like, oh, that's why I was called to wear a very homey
Mm,
attire, because it kind of, we create this balance, right? Like we're
yes.
both homey and also we're sharing a conversation that will be listened by other people. And I think it's so fascinating because being a sun in seventh house person, I'm curious to hear if you relate, but often I feel like there is that balancing act that needs to happen
Yes.
because we're so aware of our environment and we want to be like, what can I do to balance out what I observe in the environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's reminding me of like the thing we were talking about earlier when I was talking about like the subtle energetic tweaks. Like
Mm,
that can literally be your outfit.
yeah.
Like the
Totally.
magical ingredient you brought to our conversation is your sweatshirt.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like so oversized. It's like, kind of fraying at the seams. And yet here we are.
But it's like I'm comfortable. I'm a human.
Hmm.
Like this is normal. We're just connecting as people.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And I also it reminds me of what you were saying earlier about the body and about how the body has its own movement, its own desire, and it is a valid way of understanding information,
Yeah.
and gathering information. And to me, a lot of your work feels very like there's an awareness of the body, but also the awareness doesn't then translate into self-consciousness, but rather translate into like a sense of awe. And that I
Mm.
really receive in, you never really probably wrote it in those words, but that was kind of what I was receiving as I was sitting with your words.
Yeah. Thanks. I love hearing it expressed that way. And
Mm-hmm.
I definitely relate to that. It's like I think about that a lot, just like this weird thing where I'm like making things that are and completely are not about the body at the same
Mm.
time.
Yeah. Wow. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That really, wow, that's really deep. And it makes me want to talk to you about spirituality and about how you understand yourself as a spiritual being, what your path has looked like, and how did spirituality or your spiritual practices how did they find their way into your creative practice? Because that's not always something that people end up making a connection of. I have tons of
Mm.
friends who are, who work with textile, who work with the canvas, who work with music, and they have a spiritual side to them, but it's more like you see it when you meet them, at a bar for a drink, right? But it doesn't become such a conscious part of how they show up with their creative work. But I think with you, what I really admire about your presence, your work, your being is that there's, yes, the fluidity, but also I think there's a ferocity around not shoving that away. You didn't put any of these like away from the I almost want to call it the Zoom box because we've been living in our Zoom box. Like you allow
Yeah.
it to be there, you know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like actually um art like was my spiritual practice, but I just didn't know that it was
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
until, like over time it became more obvious to me that or like there's a possibility of calling it that. Um because I don't now I'm like getting into this this area where I'm like, I don't like words. These words are not right. None of these words fit. Like, what is art? What is spirituality? Neither of these are the correct word.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but for the sake of the conversation, we will use language. Um, and I guess like I I always took art very seriously. Um, and like I think it never occurred to me not to.
Mm.
It just I just naturally like focused very hard whenever I was making art and like um like kind of drop into that like this like special state of mind
Mm-hmm.
when I'm creating that just allows magical things to happen where I'm like I don't even understand how I make things a lot of the time. I'm like
Mm.
somehow that thing was made. I was there. Um and that's kind of like my favorite thing about art, I think.
Yeah.
Um but that does feel spiritual to me because it's like where did this come from?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and then and then because of that um mystery, there's this conversation of like where did that come from, and now what is it showing me, because this is a new thing I've never seen before. And so there's this like conversation that starts with my art where I'm like, oh wow, that thing came through and it like showed me this, and now like I have this whole next mission laid out, and like it's kind of like this endless conversation that happens like
Mm-hmm.
through creation.
Mm.
um and and I don't know, that just that feels spiritual to me. I think spiritual is like one of the words I know to describe that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
um but it's kind of like one of those things where as soon as you name it, it's like it starts like moving and you're like you can't
Yeah.
contain it.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm. It's the
and
mystery, and
yeah, yeah.
it's mystery is one of those words that I think is so like Gemini in eighth house.
Mhm.
Like there is something about that word that's like elusive, and it talks about what you can't see, and once you know it, it's no longer a mystery. So it's like
Yeah,
a catch-all phrase that we use in order to reflect something, a felt sense maybe, or an archetype that we are able to tap into. But once we know exactly precisely what it is, then it's no longer that.
totally.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really curious if you experience this in your art making too, or in your music.
Yeah, a lot of the times I would say, I mean, it's interesting, Rachel, you asked that because I recently have been going back to my first album, which I released in 2019. And I was working on it probably around 2016 to 2019, 2015 to 2019. And you know what's so fascinating about making music, and I think this might be the same with textile art as well, where, you know, I would go back to my older files, like my music files that I created in my computer. And guess what? The music software is no longer working because, you know, there have been so many iOS updates, right?
Yeah.
And then the files are scattered across various different laptops that that I've procured, that I've somehow killed, in the process of making the music. And then it reminds me of, for example, like microphones that I left at home and things like that. And it's all of these really, it's like a trip down memory lane. And it's funny because when I put myself back in the moment of making it, it felt so real to me. But as the years go by, it becomes more and more distant. And also, I'm no longer the person who wrote that music.
Yeah.
Like, I can't even really sing those songs anymore because I'm like, I'm not even that person.
Yeah.
It felt weird, Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. Like the fragments, like all the different, like collecting little pieces, and like how that can take you on some like weird rabbit trails.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think I've ever shared this with anyone else, at least not on record, but the music that I have for Healing the Spirit, like the theme music, the opening music, was actually something I wrote when Britton asked me to write music for her podcast. So I wrote a bunch of different little snippets. I think maybe 7 or 8 different snippets at that time. I just kind of sat down, and then for the next 3-4 hours, I was like creating these 7-8 snippets. And one of them came through, and it was this one. And when I was listening back to it, the moment it came through and then I listened back to it, I knew right away that this was for my project. And of course, she didn't pick it. It was like she picked the polar opposite. But it was fascinating to also be in this space. And I wonder if you've had this experience too, of like kind of receiving an assignment, but then the process that wanted to move through you was so much for you. And sometimes you even end up with a product that you're like, you know what? I'm not going to give it to that person because this is for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I've had that a lot. It's so weird too. Like when these things arrive, like a lot of times it just feels like it's out of nowhere. And, but I love that, like the moment of creating where like you're able to see the vision of like a future project, or like, because I think like a lot of times when we're creating, there are like these fragments or these like bits and pieces, and you're like not sure what's going to happen with them. And then you receive like that final little key, or like the final little window into like what's going to come next.
Totally. Okay, so this is bringing me to one of the questions I wanted to ask about, or I'm just going to frame this as an invitation and you can take it if this feels exciting to you. But there was something you wrote in earlier this year, I think it was in April. You wrote, I reserve the right to fluctuate. This word flux is one I have held in my practice always, allowing my body to change, honoring the need for my practice to change. Sometimes making more, sometimes making less. I'm not climbing up a staircase. I am sustaining curiosity and attempting to move with presence and awareness. And having presence and awareness can require being still. What I really loved from what you were sharing here is this idea of sustaining curiosity. And I was like, boom. When I heard that word, it just landed in my body. And I'm curious to hear you speak more about that if you're feeling called. or what's coming up for you around this idea of sustaining curiosity, because I feel like it's really related to this idea of mystery, right? And this
Yeah.
connective tissue between what we are using our limited words, right, calling creativity and spirituality.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that idea, and thank you for reading that and like really listening to it. Like it means a lot to me that like you receive that, and to like um it's cool like hearing it in someone else's voice.
A little weird,
Because when
right?
you're reading it, I'm like thinking about your practice. It's cool. But I feel like that is like the heart of my work. It's like sustaining curiosity. And like that's literally like what keeps me alive. It's like um
Mm,
the possibility of something else.
mhm,
And I just feel like there's like endless complexity
mhm,
to people. And and so, of course there's like times in my in my work or in my spiritual practice, or in anything, in like my dinner routine, where where I get really bored and I'm no longer curious, um and I've like gone through periods where I'm just like debilitatingly depressed.
mm,
And I feel like that's one of the things that like going through periods of being sick has given to me too, is like what remains of life, and like how is there room for curiosity, and how is there room for mystery when you're bedridden.
mhm, mhm.
um and so I think that that's really what that idea has come from, is like wow, even in this like in this moment of being in like a room that feels sterile, and being in like bedridden, like there's wonder in this like sip of water I'm taking.
Mm,
um
mhm.
and being able to fluctuate between like the maximalism of like having so much at my fingertips. Like right now I'm very able compared to like other points in my life. Like
Mhm.
um I can do a lot, I can create a lot with every day that I have. But there's also been other points in my life where like my life has shrunk
Mm,
into so much or so little. And but being able to see like that like minute form of my life as its own kind of cosmos.
mm.
And um I just I don't know, I guess this is that's a really big question, but like I think my main practice has been just like bringing softness and gentleness to any piece of hopelessness that I'm feeling, and
Mm.
finding ways to just like push against that and expand it a little bit more
Yeah.
into curiosity.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you feel like some of these approaches, sustaining curiosity, um, and really noticing, the little wonders of the life, do you feel like it contributes to a certain through line in your work? Like, do you see a pattern in how the finished product looks like or feels like? Or do you feel it more as like, the template from which different kinds of things sprout up?
I think, well, it might be easier for other people to see that,
Mm,
you
that's
know?
a good point.
Um, like I always think about how like um there's just often like other people can see things in your art that you just can't see.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm,
because everyone brings their own complexity when in the way that they see things. But I don't know. I feel like there are like different there like lately I've been thinking about this weird piece of art. This is actually one of my favorite pieces of art I've ever made. Um, there was like I made spaghetti
uh-huh.
and and then I didn't do the dishes, and so there was just um the noodles just dried into a circle at
Mm-hmm.
the bottom of the pan.
Mm.
And so then they became a sculpture. Like I could pick up the noodles and they were just like this dried squiggly nest that was solid. And then I put lipstick on it. And I was like, this is my self-portrait.
Wow.
So if somebody saw that, they might not be like, oh, Serpent and Bow made that.
Yeah.
But somebody who really knows me would be like, oh yeah, that is Rachel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
there is like, I mean, maybe it's the same flavor of magic. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What you were saying, Rachel, reminds me of this experience I had when I was in Amsterdam and when I went to the Van Gogh Museum for the first time because, to us outsiders, or maybe this is because I never really studied Van Gogh super seriously before, I've seen a couple paintings at the Met and that's it, right? And it's like you have a sense of like, oh, this artist is like this, or like you have a conception. But then when I went to the Van Gogh Museum and saw the whole, you know, body of work, it was so mind blowing because it was like this person was really experimenting a lot with different styles, with different strokes. And in fact, the Starry Starry Night is just like a very slim sliver of his work.
Yeah.
And that was really, I mean, completely mind blowing to me because it's like, it kind of makes me think of like the whole birth chart as well, right? How a lot of the times people really see that 10th house or that first house of ours, but
Yeah.
they don't get to see the other stuff. I mean, with you and I who are also creatives, maybe they also get to see the 5th house a little bit, but I feel like sometimes my 5th house doesn't always translate to my 10th house. My creative process and my own struggle, my own way of moving through my creative process is not always the same as how the results look like?
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that I mean, I've been thinking back to like when I was in high school because I have siblings that are that age now. And when you have to do like an advanced placement portfolio. Like when you're going to go to college, you can like take the advanced placement test for your art. And so I made this like AP portfolio and there's like sections, there's like concentration
Mm-hmm.
and breadth.
Mm-hmm.
And breadth, you're supposed to show like the expansion of everything you can do, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then concentration, you're supposed to show that like you have a specific style or a specific like um passion that you're focused on. And I even though like I took art so seriously, I always got A's in art class. I always got like high marks on all my projects. I did horrible on the advanced placement portfolio. And I think it's because um I it's because of this like it's because of the curiosity thing. I was like,
Mm,
this is really interesting. This is really interesting. This is really interesting. Like making like so many different types of things and um wanting to like create complexity in like so many different areas and
mhm,
um that not fitting into the template.
mhm, mhm. Yeah.
um yeah, but I mean probably Van Gogh would have done horrible on the test too.
Totally. Uh, I love that. Totally. I would agree. I would agree. And it's interesting that we create these rubrics, for art. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's really our relationship to it that needs to change, our relationship to the grading and how we receive that needs to change, or if the system, altogether needs to change. I don't really know, because I'm sure with a different system or under a different system, there will be other issues too, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, like no, there's too many different types of people to create like a template that fits everyone,
Yeah. Yeah,
probably.
exactly. Um, I would love to talk to you about holding space for people, because you had mentioned um, being a Sun in Seventh House person. And you also mentioned, in our email exchange before this, we were talking about how this is the Lovers year and you recently got engaged. So
Yeah.
I feel like there's kind of a loverly theme that's kind of wanting to come through in this conversation too.
Mm.
Um, and something I will say is that it's interesting that I've been thinking a lot about how the Lovers year came after the Hierophant year, and or like the Hierophant card comes before the Lovers card, however you want to
Yeah.
conceptualize this. But I think there's something about where you're at right now with being in the student teacher, learning teaching cycle, and also embracing, like I've always kind of, if I had to name an archetype for how you show up publicly, it's definitely the Lovers for me. Like I
Oh,
really
cool.
feel your
Mm.
Lovers coming through very strongly. I don't know if that's how you perceive yourself, but um yeah, I don't know if I really have a question there, but I feel like I kind of want you to just muse on that.
That's very interesting you say that. Just because, I mean, can you say why a little bit
With the
more?
Lovers
Yeah.
archetype, I feel like to me the Lovers has to do with finding pieces of ourselves that somehow we've left behind, or
Mm.
uncovering places where we perhaps haven't given ourselves enough compassion, given ourselves enough space to speak to us. And in hearing your words, and also just like how beautiful your aesthetics are in general, like just kind of really feeling like the Venusian aspect of it. There's kind of, I don't know, like to me, Lovers, even though the Golden Dawn Association is Gemini, I think, right? Lovers to me
Mm.
feels very Venusian as well. Like there's
Yeah.
something about the Lovers card that feels like it is about finding the balance that, Venus ruling Libra, like I feel that. And also,
Mhm.
um, yeah, there's something even okay when we think about Gemini, right? Like the mythology that always came to my mind is Castor and Pollux, and it's about this love that one has for the other, that they would give up their immortality to be, to at least know that this person they love is not completely dead, you know,
Wow.
even though maybe they couldn't spend time together. But I think there's that search, and also there is kind of a sense of yeah, like releasing one's own idea of like what needs to be. I
Yeah.
hope all of that makes sense.
Hmm. Um, Well, oddly, I had like the hardest time with this lover's garments. Because
Mm,
I make the garments, the tarot year garments every year. I've been making them since like 2018, I think.
mm-hmm,
And and each year it's felt like pretty clear to me like what they should look like, or like at least like the path I wanted to take toward the the symbols for each garment series. But I mean, for Lovers Year, like I started talking about it last year. So I was like, yes, there will be lovers garments. And then I didn't actually release them until like last month, I think.
mm,
September. It was either September or October.
mm-hmm.
So usually I release them in January of the new year. But this year it just I didn't feel complete on it.
Mm, mm-hmm,
Um and also like I think some of it has to do with my relationship to tarot.
mm,
Um because there's like different I feel like there's different entry points to the tarot, and there's like different ways of connecting to the cards, and you can kind of like feel that if you look at each of the tarot garments I've made, you can see like how they relate to the card. But for the Lovers Year, it's a lot more amorphous. It's
mm,
like I decided to create like the theme for them is frog and lotus.
mm-hmm,
So there's these like lovers, there's these lotus flowers, and um there's actually not a lot of symmetry in the garment, which symmetry is kind of like one of the main things I play with um when I'm making the like official Serpent and Bow garments.
yeah.
And I think I wanted to create something that was like a reflection of fluidity. It's kind of like describing the thing without fully,
Talking
how
about
do I
them.
say this?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So one of the things about the lover's garments is there's this there's actually this, it's just a pattern. Like I'm looking behind me because I like have the leotards like hanging up.
Mm-hmm,
Um but there's just these like spots
mm-hmm,
on it, and so I like repeated this pattern of these spots across like different elements. So there's like a spotted pitcher that's
mm,
pouring, and there's like spotted frogs and um spotted lotus flowers, and then there's like a spotted snake on the back too.
mm,
And so part of what I was thinking about is like fluidity and change and like transmutation, like something that's some form of continuity that's able to take different forms,
mm-hmm, mm.
and trying to show that in a new way. Um,
Wow.
so I think I really want to make I actually want to make a tapestry kind of thing that just has those images more like a scroll,
Mm-hmm.
so you can kind of read them in that form. But I can't remember what the original question was.
um, I was also retracing my steps. I think I was wanting to hear you talk more about, yeah, I think you already did, which is your relationship to tarot, but also maybe your relationship to space holding, because I know you've been doing readings, and um, there's something about that that feels very much like a natural, maybe not for others, but for you, just because of how articulate you are and how beautifully you express yourself through your writing. That feels like and also with your sun in seventh house, it just feels so right to me. But how have you been finding holding space for people? Whether that's, and maybe let's, limit it more to like doing readings for others. How has that been?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I usually, the way I approach the readings is, so I offer them in these like kind of, I'll do them for like a month and then I'll take a break for a while. Because it is a lot of energy just to like be present for people. But
totally.
What's interesting about it, I think, is like I do not have good short-term memory. So I think this is actually a tool when I'm doing readings for people, because my main thing is I think I'm really just appearing with them and being present to them and like receiving the like energy that they're sharing with me, and then reflecting it back in a new form. So I feel like one of the ways that I love to use tarot is like story medicine. Being able to like create, like I pay a lot of attention to the physical cues I get from the tarot spread itself. So like the ways the cards connect physically. And I often use that to like create story medicine in readings. And so coming back to like this anonymity thing that I brought up before, like when I'm making the garments, like there's a way that I'm actually not, I have a lot of boundaries when I'm doing readings. I'm not connecting to a person the way I would if we're like going to coffee and we're creating a friendship. I'm listening in like a slightly removed way. And it's almost like I'm like arriving with, and the space holding is like, rather than like using my mind to like figure something out, I'm just like letting all the pieces of the person's query like fall into this like bowl of my mind. And then I'm replying back to them through the cards.
Yes. I love that. That's
so
such
like,
a great imagery.
It does take my energy. It takes energy to do it. But I think like it's important to me to that like it's like sometimes I'll do a reading for like the same person a few times, and I don't really remember much about what the last reading was, but it will come back. It will come back through the cards often, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I feel like maybe we talked about this last time, and they're like, yeah. And so I think my main practice with holding space is actually like just creating room for things to like roll through me, and then doing what I can to make that information really accessible.
Wow. I love that. I need to get a reading with you.
That would be so fun.
Yeah, I would love that. I really feel so much resonance around that. I really relate to what you were saying about not always remembering what we talked about. I have kind of, it's interesting. I go through waxing and waning of periods where I take notes for people and when I don't take notes for people. And I think there's, it's just a different quality. And also in my human design, I'm a generator. So it's like kind of just seeing whatever lights me up in that moment, like really following that impulse.
Mm.
And you're right. I think there's something you're saying here that feels really true and resonant for me, which is that working with cards or working with the birth chart allows us the ability to access information almost without the filter of our ego, or at least, we get access to like more removal from that egoic layer.
Yeah.
Not that the ego layer is bad, but
No,
there's also like energy that we're bringing into that chart. Like, for example, when I was just thinking about your chart, I was like, did I know that Rachel had eighth house placements? I definitely did not look before we talked, but it was just something that kind of came up, as we were speaking. And I'm like, maybe we did talk about it. Maybe we didn't talk about it before. Who knows? But
yeah,
there's, there's also a way in which it anchors our memory. Like our modalities anchor our memories. Mm-hmm.
totally. Yeah, I love the way that like with tarot, it's like the longer you're creating your relationship with your cards, the more like certain cards will like I think every reader kind of like has their own associations with the cards.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're reading for a long period of time, like those associations just get more and more complex and give you like you're just able to receive more and more examples of like when a certain card tends to appear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes like a dictionary that guides your daily existence. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we can, and one of these days we will talk for the whole day, but I want to be mindful and respectful of your time. So I'm curious if there's anything else you still want to talk about, or do you feel like maybe we can gently wind down to a close?
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like there are so many things we could talk about, but I really enjoy like how much we talked about art today.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
It
Me
was
too.
really fun. And yeah, the like intersection of art and magic is like one of my favorite things to explore. So
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like
yeah.
I definitely would love to have you back sometime to maybe like talk about a tarot card or something like that. Or we can kind of pull tarot
Yeah.
cards for like, I don't know, the week ahead or like the month ahead or whatever. But I think that could be really, really fun. Mm-hmm.
I'd love that. We could do like a tarot astrology
Oh,
show.
yes. That would be so awesome. I've been doing that by myself, but I think doing that with another person will be so much fun, especially a friend
Yeah.
that I, love and respect. That would be cool. Yeah. So I have a couple final questions for you. The first one is I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about how people can find your work, what you have coming up, and yeah, all the ways that people can connect with you.
Well, I do share on Instagram pretty frequently. So you can find me there. My handle is at Serpent Bow. And then I send a newsletter like usually once a month. And I like to talk about like things I've been listening to and inspirations in there. So it's a little more in depth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are the main places to find me currently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're wanting to share? Anything you're launching anytime soon?
I'm really not sure what Serpent and Bow is going to look like in the new year.
Really?
Because I think, this teaching job is going to take a lot of focus.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have some things in the works. My partner's a screen printer, so I I know people have really been wanting outerwear. And so I will be like finagling a bit more screen printed garments that will be like more readily accessible than, because the Serpent and Bow things, sometimes it can take like 6 months to finish an order. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely encourage people to check out your work and to, to really just commune with the wisdom that you shepherd. I'm curious to hear as well. So the name of this project is Healing the Spirit. I'm curious to hear what comes up for you when you hear that word. Any memories, associations, any perceived ease, challenges, anything?
Well, I mean, you mentioned this like Chiron. What was this? What was the exact intersection that you mentioned? It was like
Chiron and
in,
Venus.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm really thinking about that and like want to look at my chart after this call so I can like feel into it more. But I think to me, healing the spirit has been mostly about just being able to look at what being able to look at the things that hurt and the things like the places where there's shame, bringing attention to them. And I know that like the word healing has an association with like wholeness. So I think a lot about like, whole beings, like thinking about like plants or like different phases of life and just being able to accept ourselves in like all our different states and phases, even when you're like molting. Yeah, I really like that phrasing in your title, and I do tend to think about it a lot. Like every time I listen to your podcast, I'm like, healing the spirit. Okay.
I think
I'll listen to things like when I'm printing at work, or when I'm cutting things out. So I'm able to listen really deeply because my hands are busy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate again like the depth of your listening and like your ability to like help people like excavate language.
Thank you. It's so beautiful. I love that answer, Rachel. I feel like it's been one of the biggest gifts of doing this project has been in asking that question, because I don't know what that means personally myself. And I think it really depends on the day too, right? It's one of those things that, I think is such a rich place for continuous contemplation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, now, like, for some reason, I'm just thinking like healing requires death. Like there are, there's so many different components to the process of healing. And so just trying to like make room to accept all of them.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. This has been such a blessing. You are a radiant being, and I just love that we are in each other's orbit. So thank you for sharing everything you've shared. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you too for like creating this podcast that that allows us to see so many different magical people. I love that.
Mm-hmm. All right, that is it for my conversation with Rachel. Thank you so much for listening. If you resonated with Rachel's voice and with Rachel's work, check her out, connect with her. She's at Serpent and Bow everywhere. And I will have all of the links below as well for you to more easily connect with her. I highly encourage you to check out her work and find ways to connect with Rachel if her voice resonates with you. I am always in awe of the fact that I get to do this, and I don't do this alone. All of you listening are also such an integral part of this podcast. I would not be doing it if you weren't listening, so thank you. And especially if you're listening up to this point, mega thank you. And if you happen to want to make my day, feel free to share this podcast with anyone in your life that you feel might benefit or might enjoy, might derive pleasure from these conversations and these episodes. I really, really appreciate all of your support. This podcast is not sponsored. This podcast is just something that I do out of love and pleasure with my own equipments in my own home, with the collaboration from, incredible individuals like Rachel. So I certainly would love it if you can share this podcast far and wide and start conversations with your own communities from the things that you heard on this podcast. All right. Thank you so much for being here with me. I am so grateful for your presence and your attention, and I'm sending you lots of gentleness as you move through your path, wherever you might find yourself within that path. I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon, and take good care of yourselves.